Thank you for watching KTN News and welcome back to Africa Speaks as we continue having conversations on this show. And on this segment specifically, we talk about the week in review. On set with me is Onchari Oyeyo, international affairs expert. Onchari, you had an issue when I said, he says.
Well, I don't say. The schools that I'm going to give me the title.
Give you the title.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also about the region issues. And just let's dive straight into that. And
yes.
Ugandan president has just asked Turkanas from Kenya to return his cows, else he will act. What do you think about what he said?
Well, I listened to him. I've read the presidential, decree he has made, and I think it's very reasonable. He has insisted the cows have to be taken back. And then, of course, there were 5 guys who were killed. There was Susan involved. And then, of course, 2 geologists and some other guy, a total of 5 of them. So he even went ahead to talk about a traditional system in Uganda where there's what we call blood settlement, kukaraba, where the two sides come together and then a specific number of cows is given by those who killed to the families that have been affected.
Is he suggesting that happens?
That can happen, with coordination from both governments. So what he did, he actually spoke like the elder statesman he is. So he's not looking for a fight. He's not trying to create some kind of mess in the region. He's being sensible. And, the outcome of that kind of conversation shows the weakness we have in handling the whole issue of disarmament. In Uganda, it's very effective. Back here, it's different. So we support the president in trying to end this menace of banditry so that it does not cross over to. And it shows the kind of pressure the bandits have gotten from here. So they've gone over now to Uganda. And that is why at the onset of this exercise, there was a mistake. The announcement was made that there was going to be an operation to kick out banditry. If I tell you I'm coming to burn down your house, I'm basically preparing you to wait for me and even attack me. So they should have sent soldiers to the border, they close it, and then they do what? They make the announcement so that these guys could not have a chance of taking off to Uganda. So that was a mistake. But then I think the pressure that has been sustained over the last few days has made a difference. So the cows that were stolen have to be taken back. And obviously the regional leaders from our side, in charge of the Turkanas have to reach out and tell them, hey, don't do this because you're creating now a diplomatic scaffold with Uganda, which is not required. And even went ahead to say the 2,500 cows may not be the actual number, it could be down. So he said they have to be checked. If it's a smaller number, they just get paid. So he's not looking for a fight. Yeah.
And for a very long time, Kenya has been going abroad to go benchmark on how to handle issues.
Yes.
Now that disarmament has happened very well in Uganda, do you think it's about time we just took a bus, went there and studied how they managed to do it so that we can come replicate this back home?
Kenyans are very nice people. We always have the answers we need. The problem is, even we know, for example, if you get to know as Onchari, I'm the one who's responsible for maybe smuggling guns from some place to some place, you will behave like you don't know. So banditry in Kenya is a business. We know guys who actually take guns from some places, smuggle them to some young men in those places, and they use them to bring cows to Nairobi for sale. If you go to these markets in Bama, Dagoretti, all the cows, most of them, so to say, stolen from those places where we have banditry. So we have a solution to our problems, always. So what we have to, we don't have to go to Uganda to benchmark. We just have to be honest. We say, once and for all, let's get rid of this problem. The politicians and business people who finance this criminal activity should be told to stop. And I think the president made it very clear. So once again, as Kenyans, we support the move by the government to end that. So I think the operation must not stop until it's completely eradicated from the North Rift.
And still in the region now, let's talk about Sudan. The
Yes.
fighting is still ongoing, but as we speak right now, there is a relevant truce for 7 days that was brokered in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, together with the United States, and that has seen the guns go down, but the conflict still exists. The regional leaders, remember President William Ruto, when he was in South Africa, asked the generals to stop with the nonsense because let me just verbatim quote him. He says, these guns, bombs and everything are bought by the African money. They cannot be used to fight Africa.
They have to stop.
As we progress going forward, what do you think is the message that the region itself should be sending to the generals in Sudan?
I expect every president, prime minister, or head of state and government from Africa to actually echo the message by the president. They should stop the nonsense. And if I were given a chance, this guy called Dagalo or Hemet, the guy,
Hemeti,
who was, grown and supported by Bashir. He was from the RSF. That was a quasi-militia that was formed. It's responsible for the atrocious activities that were carried out in Darfur by the Janjaweed. So he has blood on his hands already. If I were to be asked what should be done, actually he should be killed. Okay? If you've killed people and you want now to destabilize an entire nation, you should be killed. So the message is very simple. They need to stop the nonsense. They need to stop destroying their own infrastructure. And we have interference, of course, from outside. There's a reason why that conversation had to take place in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia has an interest in Sudan. And of course, obviously, the United States also has an interest. But before we can even go outside the continent to look for solutions, we need to do it within the continent. So the message by our president should be supported by everybody. These guys have to sit down, find a solution, stop the fighting, and obviously help advance the message of peace within the continent.
And you see, Onchari, as we talk about this conversation happening in Saudi Arabia being brokered together with the United States, begs the question, in Africa we have the African Union that is in charge of addressing issues and problems within Africa. Why can't just African Union step up to be counted as the body that is responsible of bringing peace, whether in DR Congo, in Burkina Faso, let's talk about Sudan. Why is it that all these discussions tend to happen outside the continent, yet we have African Union?
It all boils down to what we call realism. In the international space, we have influence. Influence comes with military power and economic strength. If you don't have that, you'll always be overlooked. That is why, of course, we have conversations going on within the continent, the African Union, the regional forces, East African Community, and all that, having conversations as to how to end the conflict in Sudan. But due to lack of this influence that I'm talking about, they overlooked, they overstepped, they overran. So whatever discussion takes place in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, supported by Saudi Arabia itself and the United States, has more currency, it has more weight. That is why those guys have to listen, because, the US can say, if you guys don't sit down and agree, we'll use our own means and get rid of either both of you or one of you. And they know those guys have the requisite tools and strength to take action. Now, the African Union can only be respected if it can have its pronouncements supported by action. Now, it's possible, but there's no political will. They don't know how to amass their resources. If we had an African force, what they could have done is to send them to Sudan very quickly, make sure citizens are protected and the civilian infrastructure is supported. Talk about airports, talk about roads, talk about stations for TV and radio, but we've not done that. So insofar as we continue just making verbal or theoretical pronouncements, guys who are involved directly in conflict will never pay attention. So that is the problem that we have, and we'll keep on watching and seeing foreigners from outside the continent calling shots in issues we should be able to handle as Africans. So for Sudan, unfortunately for a country like Kenya, we have a relatively stronger economy, in as much as inside here we're crying. Guys from outside always want
You're not crying, it's factual.
Well, it's worse out there within the continent. So when you look at the number of people pouring in from Sudan, it's so high. And when they land here, they look for so many, let me say, unlawful methods or means to actually stay safe.
Survive.
They're running away. And most of these guys obviously have criminal records. Talk about Al-Qaeda elements. Once they land in Nairobi, they go to maybe Isli and stuff like that. They build looking for documents. Some are processing documents to pretend to be students. Some are looking for our vulnerable and, let me say, stupid girls to use them as anchor wives. Someone comes from Sudan, maybe it's an Al-Qaeda, member, looks for a girl here, dupes her with a small amount of money, and then from there, she goes and processes a marriage certificate, so the guy cannot be sent away. He becomes a Kenyan citizen like that. So there are so many here. There's a reason why our president has to insist on seeing a resolution to the Sudan conflict. And that is the kind of message which has to be supported by our leaders from across the continent.
And you see, Onchari, you've raised something very important, that is to do with having an African force. If you look at even the United Nations Security Council, Africa does not have a permanent seat on that seat, yet we are part of this geopolitical space that currently exists. As African Union, knowing very well that we are basically on our own, is it about time that these 54 presidents sat down and came up with a policy to have an African Union force that is always ready at any given time to walk in where there is problem and sort out that mess once and for all?
That is long overdue. When you look at the European Union, they have that. When you look at the Americans, they have that. And if you go to Eastern Europe, they have that. They always have that kind of force. And if it's not there on a formal basis, the coordination is very, very meticulous. It happens very quickly, and if they need, support, it comes up. We don't have that. So because we take so long to achieve this kind of thing, what we need to do is to have it on standby. They should be there. And that points to the kind of leadership we have at the African Union. We don't have innovative thinkers. We don't have creative people. We don't have, people who can forecast into the future and see what we need. Now, conflict is not new, not just in Africa, but the world over. And the best managers of conflict are the ones who are ready for it. You foresee it, and then you take action. Now, the Americans were ready for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that is why very early they said, if the Russians get into Ukraine, they'll find it very rough. So the Russians said, okay, we'll get in, and within days, we'll topple the Zelensky government and move out. Because the Americans saw what was coming, they got prepared. And you can see they've given the Russians a very long fight.
It's 1 year plus.
So once you prepared for conflict, you can handle it. You can actually tilt it to fit what you want. Mm-hmm. So the African Union has to be prepared. They have to reach out. They have to talk to progressive and serious thinkers like our president now. I think I like his strength. I like his energy. We get a force, and anytime there's a conflict somewhere, we move in and help, especially in the protection of economic installations and citizens. Yeah.
And across the border as well, we have Congo, the fighting that is going there between the M23 rebels and the Congolese army, together with the regional forces that have walked in there, including the Kenya Defense Forces. Yes. And the progress so far, not much that is coming from there. But remember, retired President Uhuru Kenyatta was given a special update on the progress so far. From your end, where are we in making sure that Congo as well has peace?
I think there is progress in as much as you might want to deny that. There was a ceasefire, of course, which was agreed upon by the M23 rebels and the Congolese army. And of course, the complaints by Tshisekedi himself, that is the Congolese president, were taken into consideration. The commander was changed,
yes,
from Nyaga to Kiugu. And Kiugu has been briefed. He's been told what had been achieved, so obviously he knows where to start. And the Rwandese government was, of course, given a notice to stop meddling with Congolese affairs. So what's happening now, there's what we call exploitation of corruption. The president of Congo came out and said that there was collusion between some of the forces, with the exception of Burundi. I think the only force he found to be committed to creating the agreed upon atmosphere was the Burundi force. So the rest of the guys were actually working with the M23. So on so many occasions, our forces have been accused of, we're talking about the Kenyan army, of engaging in corruption. Talk about Chako in Somalia. Talk about, even in Westgate, there was an allegation of some guys just carrying cash. So that is a very shameful display. If that has been taken to Congo, you can understand why the president was visibly angry and frustrated. And
you can only hope that even where such allegations do exist, that investigations get to take place and the guilty are actually charged in court of law. Now let's talk about South Africa and their connections to Russia. That has really brought a lot of heat on them. Remember, the US ambassador to South Africa said that they actually gave weapons to Russia. How does this make South Africa look in a few minutes?
It paints a very negative picture of South Africa. When you look at the global opinion on the war in Ukraine, every reasonable power out there, whether big or small, is of the opinion that the Russians made a mistake to invade a sovereign state. So any kind of support that is directed towards Russia is obviously perceived to be in bad faith. That is lack of compassion and empathy for the people of Ukraine who are suffering from Russian bombs every single day. And it's a very negative, move by a country like South Africa, which is suffering. South African citizens are crying of lack of power. They don't have that.
Power rationing, yes.
And then of course we have a serious economic crisis which Ramaphosa cannot be able to contain. So you don't have space to begin exporting weapons to Russia for whatever reason. So I like the statement which was made by the ambassador, and I think all men and women of goodwill have to stand with the people of Ukraine. There is no excuse, whether it's military or whatever, for the invasion of Ukraine.
But someone would say that we are a sovereign state and we get to choose our friends. How do you respond to that?
If you're supplying weapons to someone who is killing people somewhere for reasons that you cannot understand, you're making a mistake. That is a violation of the international order. I've watched a number of commentators trying to twist it and give it to Russia and South Africa. You cannot bend it. Malice is malice, evil is evil, whether you look at it from the south or the north.
Yes. And that is a good place to wind up the conversation. In studio with me is Onchari Oyeyo, International Affairs Expert with Center for African Progress. My name is Dennis Aseto. Conversations about what is happening across the world only on Africa Speaks. For everybody that made this a success, asante sana. Enjoy the rest of your viewing.